هبوا يا رجال ليلنا قد طال، هبوا يا رجال ليلنا قد طال، هيا هيا ننظر النضال، هيا هيا
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على نبيه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا مزيدا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, we spoke mostly about spiritual matters throughout this month. We gave a little talk about Spain, and today inshallah we'll mention another historic victory that Allah blessed this ummah with in Ramadan, because this ummah needs to have a bond with its honorable beginning. This is the ummah that won't be a righteous ummah unless it knows about its beginning. It has to have ties to its early generation. There's no good in an ummah that has leaders who taint and twist the glorious history. Those who make it seem like it's a norm that Muslims should always live defeated and surrenderous. That the Muslims are supposed to live always under tyranny and oppression. The submissionists to the enemies of Allah, deluded in their deen and lacking in their manhood. The final 10 days of Ramadan commemorate worship, but at the same time, the final 10 days of Ramadan commemorate defeats to some of the worst enemies of Allah. The defeat of the Tatar in Ayn Jalut, the Battle of Ayn Jalut, the battle that put an end to the transgression of an empire that massacred the Muslims for a long time on the 25th day of Ramadan, 658 years after the Hijrah. 658 years after the Hijrah. The Mongols came out of the area of China. Their first leader was Genghis Khan. And just to give you a brief introduction, you'll know what they're about when you know what Genghis Khan, the name of their leader, means. You'll know how arrogant they were. It means the compeller of the universe. It means the king of all kings. It means the strongest of all the strong, depending on the variations in translations. He was a man who loved bloodshed, but at the same time, he had the ability to gather people. He took advantage of the weak ummah. Even though the Islamic ummah back then was nearly half the globe, it went back then from the borders of China, down to Asia, down to Africa, down to Europe, in Spain, in Andalus. Nearly half the globe was for the Muslim. But there was division and problems, stuff that the Prophet ﷺ warned about. It's not about number and it's not about size. It's about being close and near to Allah. There was the Khilafah Abbasiyah, the Abbasiyah Khilafah that was there. But it was a mere name and not a reality. They were busy gaining wealth and making sure that they remain leaders and not caring about the ummah and neglecting the ummah. And that was in Iraq. Then if you move a little bit down to Egypt and Sham and Hijaz and Yemen, it was under the rule of some of the descendants of Salah ad-Dīn al-Ayyubi, but they were nothing like their father. They cared about power. They split the solid nation their father established and united. The nation he took off from to destroy the Crusaders in Hittin. The kids and grandkids of Salah ad-Din brought that strong nation into ruins with their divisions and problems and love of leadership. Small kingdoms, each one fighting and quarreling with the other over power, love of power. To make this introduction short so we can get to our talk, it's sufficient to know a paragraph that Ibn al-Athir wrote in his book on the situation back then. The famous historian Ibn Athir in his book Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh, and he's one of the top Islamic historians. When he talks about it, he says, I remained silent about this, about this dark era for a long time, for years. I tried to avoid writing about it. I put a leg forward and a leg backward, hesitant to write about this era and what the Muslims went through. I wish my mother never gave birth to me. I wish I died before this. I wish I was forgotten and out of sight. He's in agony. Ibn Athir is in agony. He's melting in agony over atrocities that happened back then. Basically, if you say was among the biggest massacres this earth has seen, among the biggest massacres this earth has seen since the time of Adam, you'd be probably accurate and not exaggerated. Anything close to it would be what Bukhta did to Bani Israel back in Bayt al-Maqdis 563 years before Isa alayhi salam. It was a massacre. Ibn Athir goes on to say, a woman from the Tatar would enter a house with men, women, and children, she would kill the men, women, and children. Not one would even think to defend himself because of the defeatist, surrenderous, enslaved mentality. Not a single person in that area would think to defend themselves. He goes on to say, I was told that in Muragha, a man from the Tatar would enter an area with 100 men and he'd kill one after another, and not a single one of them would raise his hands or even try to defend himself or his brothers. They got arrogant, similar to Ad. When Ad got arrogant, they said, who's stronger than us? Hud, come here, who's stronger than us? فأما عاد فاستكبروا في الأرض بغير الحق وقالوا من أشد منا قوة. Ad got arrogant without right. They said, who's mightier than us in strength? We're the strongest. Meaning, we're even stronger than your Lord, Hud. أولم يروا أن الله الذي خلقهم هو أشد منهم قوة وكانوا بآياتنا يجحدون. Did they forget the one who created them? He's mightier than them in strength and power. And they denied our ayat. وكانوا بآياتنا يجحدون فأرسلنا عليهم ريحا صرصرا في أيام نحسات لنذيقهم عذاب الخزي في الحياة الدنيا. What happened? Allah sent furious winds in days of evil omen for them to destroy them, to give them a taste of disgrace and humiliation in this world, and what's in the life after is even worse. وَلَعَذَابُ الْآخِرَةِ أَخْزَى وَهُمْ لَا يُنصَرُونَ. You want to get arrogant, Ad? It's not a game. You don't get arrogant with Allah and the believers. They want to post up with Allah. You don't post up with Allah. Who's stronger than us? How dare you say a statement like that? Okay, Ad, you want to say you're strong. Here's a little bit of wind. Let's see how strong you are. The wind took those physical giants in the air like toothpicks and dropped them down to their demise and end on their heads. If you were so strong, why don't you defend? It was just a little bit of wind. Namrud, same thing. When he stood up to Ibrahim and got arrogant and said he brings life and death, Allah took him with a little fly. Okay, you guys claim you're all that. Defend yourself from a little fly that's going to enter your brain and bring you to restlessness until your death. Defend yourself. When they said the Titanic was a ship that Allah couldn't sink, Allah sunk it for them. You don't post up with Allah. When they said the army of the Tatar could never be defeated, Allah sent a servant of His to defeat it and destroy it. Quṭuz took leadership within 1 year. Our man here is Quṭuz, Sayf Quṭuz. He took leadership. Within 1 year, Allah defeated, of his leadership, Allah defeated the Tatar through him. In this blessed month, a small army, nothing compared to their opponents. An army that was literally set up at the spur of the moment. It was set up in deep, dark times, like times of ours today. A time when the Ummah was divided. Leaders were more concerned about their thrones more than they were about their Ummah. The Khilafah was an image with no reality to it. Disputes were all over. From the deep darkness of that night the Muslims were going through, arose a man and a giant named Al-Malik al-Muẓaffar Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz. He took power 657 after the Hijrah. The Tatar were at the peak of their transgression. Egypt was at stake where he was a leader. They were on the verge of attacking Egypt. He took leadership to bring honor and victory to this ummah. Within a year, that's why I reiterate the dates. Within a year of taking leadership, he put an end to one of the most dangerous armies the Islamic ummah was facing. The Tatar were known for their ruthlessness and recklessness and thunderbolt victories. They were quick and swift in their battles. Most of it was by terrorizing everyone. Before they reached an area, the news of their terror and what they do and what they would do and what they're going to do scared everyone to defeat. They went by massive armies even if their opponents were nobody. You read in history about them that they entered a town and destroyed it into ruins. There's no longer a town after they entered it. They didn't care about women and kids and elders and oppressed and oppressors and soldiers and civilians. Everyone and everything is the same. They kept no promises and always breached all their covenants. They started invading Muslim lands by Bukhara, by what's today Uzbekistan, the Russia. The Muslims were weak and they surrendered there. They gave in. And Genghis Khan gave them a promise. If they surrender, he's not going to harm them. Ibn Kathir in the 12th volume of Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya said, after he promised not to kill anyone of the Muslims if they surrendered, he killed from them a number only Allah knows. He apprehended the women and raped them. This is Ibn Kathir saying. They took the women and raped them in front of their male family members. The massacres of the Tatar went on for over half a century. Muslim lived in massacre after massacre. Everyone's looking. It's not my turf. Who cares? I'm still in power. Some of the Muslim leaders went on to even help them as long as they let them stay in power. The matter really escalated when at 654 after the Hijrah, when the Tatar acquired the lands of the Romans. Their leader Holako, the son of the founder Genghis Khan, took power, and he headed to Baghdad in 656 after the Hijrah. He committed some of the biggest massacres, killing, stealing, ransacking, looting, raping, destroying the Abbasiyya Khilafah. They destroyed or tried to destroy the Islamic civilization. They even killed the Khalifa Al-Mu'tasim Billah and his family and his aides. Holako in Iraq, in less than 12 days, killed over 2 million Muslims in Baghdad. He had extreme hatred for Muslims and the smell of Islam. He was considered among the biggest enemies of Islam ever, and that even got worse through his wife. She used to inspire him because she was a crusader who hated Muslims as well. When he entered Baghdad, he didn't care about the Khilafah. The Khilafah was really like a hollow shell. It was just by name. His intention was to make the Ummah extinct. He wanted to kill every believer on the face of this earth. They got arrogant. They got belligerent. They kept taking Muslim lands, massacring, killing, raping. They passed Baghdad. They went to the Furat. They went down to Halab in Syria. They killed nearly all its people. Then they advanced and headed to Damascus. And then they went down to Nablus and Karak and Bayt al-Maqdis and Gaza. No resistance, no one to stand up for them. Everyone was being a coward, watching and surrendering, watching and surrendering. No one able to stand up to them. No one really wanted to stand up to them. Now they reached their peak of their aggression. Once this happens, doesn't matter, Muslim, non-Muslim. Once someone gets the peak of his aggression, we said it many times, whether it's an individual or a nation. Once they hit their peak in oppression, the downfall is imminent and right there. Holako, the leader, sent 40 men with a letter to our king here, Al-Malik al-Muẓaffar Quṭuz. He was the leader of Egypt. And he sent a letter threatening him. But Quṭuz had another idea. He gathered the leaders and decided to kill all 40 of the messengers. They killed all 40 and hung their heads on the gates of Al-Qahira. Why he killed them, there's many explanations to that. We really don't have to have time to get into it. Quṭuz, by the will of Allah, was determined to protect the Ummah. He wanted to fight, especially that he knew that the Tatar were heading to Egypt, no way out of it. He either gets killed, him and his people and the Muslims gets killed like sheep, or they die like men, or they may become victorious. So Al-Malik al-Muẓaffar Quṭuz began to inspire the leaders to fight. He gathered the fighters from all over. He declared that it's time to fight. He raised the flag of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He went out of his way to try to unite the neighboring areas, the leaders in Sham. They were on very bad terms, the Muslim leaders next to him. He went on telling them, the Ayyubiyin, the sons of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, that they're going to invade Egypt in a short time. Let's unite. Let's put our differences behind us. Let's unite for the sake of Allah and fight the Tatar together. The tensions with the Muslim leaders were so bad. And his main worry was a man called An-Nasir Yusuf al-Ayyubi, the Amir of Damascus. He was a descendant of our leader Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, a grandson by blood, not by action. This descendant told the Tatar after their victory in Baghdad, when you come down here, I'll help you against Quṭuz. I'll help you acquire Egypt. He just wants to stay in power. The descendants of Salah ad-Din destroyed a legacy in a nation their father Salah ad-Din established. They all wanted power. That's all their concern was. They divided a strong nation that their father established amongst each other. Amir and a king and a leader in Damascus, and another king and Amir and leader. These are little cities. In Halab, and another king and leader in Hama, and another king and leader in Hams. All chiefs, no Indians, and all seeking power to acquire and inherit it for their kids. Quṭuz had bigger goals. It wasn't about us, me, and you in power. It's deeper than that. The honor of the Ummah is at stake. Our women are at stake. Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz wanted to defend the Ummah. And Nasr Yusuf al-Ayyubi, the Amir of Sham, wanted to defend his throne, like the leaders of today. People who recline to this life, a life of luxuries, letting the Ummah get massacred and raped all over. So Quṭuz tried everything to let the past go behind and try to convince them to unite and face off this enemy that's coming to kill us. Quṭuz was most worried about this man, and Nasr Yusuf al-Ayyubi, the Amir of Damascus next to him, nearby him, because he feared, which was really going to happen if he stayed in power, that he's going to betray him and join with the enemies against him once the war began. To show you how noble Quṭuz was, how one man can make a determining difference in this ummah, Quṭuz, the leader of Egypt, knew that the neighboring man, Nasr Yusuf al-Ayyubi, loved leadership. So Quṭuz wrote him and sent him a messenger. He said, you can have Egypt. I'm the leader of Egypt. You can have it. You can have my land. Take my land. Just let me be a rep. I'll be under your control. It'll be under your control. Let's just join together against this common enemy. Amazing stuff. You could never imagine leaders doing that. Today you couldn't get a leader of an Islamic society, a little markaz, a little masjid, to step down. Someone who no one even knows or cares about. But Quṭuz wasn't about leadership. It was about protecting the ummah, the honor of the ummah, the women of the ummah, the blood of the ummah. And Nasr Yusuf al-Ayyubi was arrogant. He refused that offer. The days went on, and he was an obstacle. He was an obstacle to Quṭuz, Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz, because once the Tatar came, he was going to join them. But when you put your reliance on Allah and you're determined and you put your faith on Allah, Allah will find you a way out. A short time after this, after the offer of Quṭuz, the Tatar come to Halab in Damascus and oust Nasr Yusuf al-Ayyubi, and he flees like a coward with his soldiers to Palestine, and from there he's forced to join the army of Quṭuz. That didn't last long. He was a total failure. So he split away from Quṭuz while most of his soldiers wanted to remain with Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz. And then soon after that he was killed by some Tatar soldiers. Now Allah got rid of this man, and not only that, but he got his soldiers behind them. We talked yesterday on the introduction of one of the great victories of Islam, the Battle of Ayn Jalut, the spring of Goliath. Many ask me what it is in English. It's called the spring of Goliath. We speak about it in this month because it occurred in this month. It was one of the greatest victories for this ummah during dark times for the ummah. And we Muslims need to know such essential parts of their history. We spoke about how the ummah was divided and each leader was trying to protect his throne. Each was concerned about himself, and a man stood up to the task, a man named Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz. For nearly half a century or so, no one was able to stand to the transgression of the Tatar, who killed in Baghdad in less than 2 weeks, as I said, over 2 million Muslims. Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz turned out to unite the Muslims. He started with his neighboring leader, the Amir of Sham, the son of Salah ad-Dīn al-Ayyubi. But he refused. Instead of uniting with his Muslim brother, he turned against his brother and he offered the Tatar help if they let him stay in power. The days went on and the Tatar turned on this man and took his land while he fled. Some Muslims or so-called Muslims think power and honor comes through the enemies. They seek honor from other than Allah, which always ends up in humiliation and dishonor, sooner or later. They use one, abuse them, and dump them. No one could have been more surrenderous and helpful to the enemies of Allah than the prime examples we have today, like Al-Qaddafi and Mubarak and their likes and their brothers. Look where they're at today. Allah blessed Quṭuz in that Salah ad-Din's son was ousted from Syria, from Damascus to Palestine, to Palestine, by the Tatar. By the same enemies he offered himself to. Then he joined by force Quṭuz, but he proved, like I said, that he was a failure, and his troops remained with Quṭuz and he left. Now, Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz doesn't have to worry about al-Nasir Yusuf al-Ayyubi. One of the problems, actually a major obstacle, is gone. When Allah sees solid, determined, sincere, dedicated men, He prepares for them the means of victory. Look what happened with his opponent. Quṭuz needed wealth now. So he went to collect for the army. And he had ulama to his side. And he chose a righteous alim, a beacon of truth, Izzah ibn Abd Salam. Izzah ibn Abd Salam supported him with his famous fatwa and advice. Izzah issued stunning fatwa that inspired the Ummah. Why do you think people listen to Izzah ibn Abd Salam? The people listened to Izzah because he had a history of speaking against rulers, supposed Muslim rulers who aligned themselves with the Crusaders. He used to speak about them. If Izzah ibn Abd Salam was living today, the surrenderous Murji'ah rejects, the worshippers and slaves of the rulers, would call him a takfiri and a khariji. When Quṭuz went to Izzah ibn Abd Salam, out of all the ulama, because sincere leaders, no sincere ulama, he went to him, he said, what do you think we should do? Should we go on and attempt to defend ourselves against the Tatar, or should we wait or surrender, or what? 50 years nearly, half a century or so, no one dared to stand up to him. Izzah, in a firm, solid heart, said, fight them and I guarantee victory. Fight them and I guarantee victory. That's all he said. Assuring them, be strong with Allah. Quṭuz told them, but we got no money. And there was a lot of ulama in that gathering. But Izzah took center stage. This is time for the men to speak up. That's time for the men. Izzah said, okay, the ruling on this, when enemies try to invade Muslim lands, you must use all the wealth in the house of the Muslims. Bayt Mal al-Muslimin, all that goes to the army to gather and make an army. They're literally making an army out of scratch. When there's no longer money in the Bayt Mal al-Muslimin, the house of the wealth of the Muslim, the leader can take from the Ummah, can impose taxes, necessary taxes. He can impose taxes on them, and that was the issue. Then the leaders were there. There was some leaders there. Some of them were wealthy. So look what Izzah said. Before you impose those taxes I'm telling you about, the leaders got to start by bringing in all their excess wealth. Anything not essential and necessary for them, bring it on. And the leaders complied. One after another would go and bring all his wealth and his wife's gold and jewelry and set it down, and then give an oath, Wallahi, I left nothing. In the second, in the third, until they brought everything. When that wasn't enough, they imposed 1 dinar on every man in Egypt, of everyone in Egypt, 1 dinar, who's able to pay. Al-Malik al-Muẓaffar sent a small amount of soldiers then to check out the movement of the enemies. And they seen a small group that's doing the same. So the clashes began. And then finally on the 25th day of Ramadan, 658 after the Hijrah, 755 years ago exactly, the two armies clashed full force. The Muslim army was approximately 20,000 and their opponents was nearly 200,000. Some dispute the numbers, but it's right about there. Allah occupied Hulaku, the leader at that time, with a relative he was fighting near China. So he sent his best general, he's called Katibgha, who was among the Romans. And some say the only reason the Muslims were such victorious was because the Tatar were drained at that time in era, and the general he sent wasn't really as strong as Hulaku. Those are the ones who can't accept or fathom the heavenly victories. When the Muslims want victory through the right ways, Allah will give it to them. Now they say the leader wasn't that, the general wasn't all that, and the Tatar were really weak. And when I went and read about this general he sent, he was one of the finest and best generals and warriors of that time. He was a man from, some say he was 60, some say he was 70. He was among those who learned warrior tactics, not from Hulaku the son, from the founder Genghis Khan himself, who was a master warrior. He died. Genghis Khan had died 34 years before this event. So for 30 years, this general, Katibgha, was doing nothing but fighting. He was a master and pioneer and an artistic fighter in general. Nothing could stand in his way, or they thought. But when the victory comes from Allah, in tansurullah yansurkum. In Ramadan, in the final 10 days, on the 25th day of Ramadan, and that's why we chose this topic in Ramadan. The dust of the battle began to rise. The clink of the swords began to echo. The voices grew louder and louder with Allahu Akbar, the ammunition for the believers. It grew louder and louder from soldiers fighting in the field and onlooker farmers who were in the valleys nearby. The Muslims mixed with the Tatar and the bodies began to fall. Ours in heaven, inshallah, and theirs to hell. At the beginning, it was a stunning victory for the Muslim, but the Muslims wavered a little bit. So listen to righteous leaders what they do. Quṭuz, seen him. So he goes in front of everyone. He takes his helmet off and throws it down and says, Wa Islamah, wa Islamah, wa Islamah. Islam is at stake. And he pushed forth himself. They seen the leader like this, with no helmet, penetrating deep into the enemy lines. It inspired the Muslims to follow along. The general of the Tatar gets killed. The army gets destroyed. The Muslims chase him away. Some killed and some apprehended. It was a stunning victory. It was a stunning victory that brought the Tatar to their demise. There was another smaller battle after that in Bisan, where the Muslims fought a deadly, courageous battle, and they were granted victory. This is one of the biggest battles or victories for the history of the Muslims. Why? Because if they didn't stop the Mughal, if they didn't stop their spread at this time, they were coming to take Egypt. Had Quṭuz not manned up and stood up to them in Ayn Jalut, they would have slaughtered the Muslims of Egypt. Then they moved on to other parts of Africa. Then they would have moved on to Europe. That was their intention. For nearly half a century, Muslims didn't win a single battle against these people. Barely anyone ever stood up to him. Why did they win now? And I can talk like a philosophist now and go left and right and pretend I'm a history expert. But the real reason of the victory here was a secret. It was a secret in something Umar wrote to his general Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas years ago. That's the real reason, no other reason. You can talk a lot about it and pretend you're a philosophist, but that's the reason. From every angle you look at it, it was a defeat for Muslims. Untrained army. The army of Quṭuz, he really got it literally within days. In less than a year. They were outnumbered by a massive army that mastered genocide and warfare for decades, for half a century. They defeated the army that swept nations off. What's the secret in the letter of Umar? He used to send to his generals, I advise you and the soldiers to fear Allah in all settings. That's the secret. The fear of Allah is the biggest ammunition against your enemies. Fear your sins more than you fear your enemies. Fear your sins more than you fear your enemies. Muslims win by the sins of their enemies against Allah. If we're equal in sins, they'll have power over us, because then it becomes power over power, and they're always more powerful than us, and they have more soldiers. So it's taqwa. After Ayn Jalut, it was a turning point in the demeanor of the entire ummah. The demeanor of the entire ummah changed. He brought back honor to the ummah. He brought manhood to the men of this ummah. Now, no longer would you see a man watching 100 men get slaughtered and not even think about defending himself or protecting himself. Now, they had no revived hope in Allah. He showed them in reality. And no matter how big and mighty the opponent may seem, as long as they are with Allah, there's victory. لا يغرنك تقلب الذين كفروا في البلاد متاع قليل. Let not the free disposal, the affluence of the disbelievers throughout the land deceive you. متاع قليل. متاع قليل, brothers. Brief enjoyment. Then their ultimate abode is to hellfire. And what a worse place that is. Muslims began to realize that with Allah on their side, they can get victory. They no longer need to sit back and wait for the Mahdi like some used to say and some say today. When Allah wants victory and good for someone, there is no one who can deprive it. وَإِنْ يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ in Surah Al-An'am, وَإِنْ يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ وَإِنْ يَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And likewise in Yunus, Surah Yunus, وَإِنْ يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ وَإِنْ يُرِدْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَلَا رَادَّ لِفَضْلِهِ يُصِيبُ بِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. After a half a century of Muslims being treated worse than animals and massacred and annihilated and raped, each dog wanting a piece of the flesh of this ummah, each dog running to get a piece of the flesh of this ummah, the snakes were freely roaming around the Muslim territories. Now with Ayn Jalut, a victory, the game is over. The great victory brought back prestige and honor and status to the ummah, and even justice to the non-Muslims. The victory was so smooth, the victory was so swift and unexpected that the great army of Hulaku didn't even think about doing revenge after this. Unlike what happened to them in the past, their revenge would be superb. All history documents after this is a little scrimmage when they sent out a little few soldiers, a small army, just to prove that they exist. But nothing major, nothing significant. The honor of the ummah was retrieved. You've seen those today in the lands of Amr ibn al-As, the lands of La ilaha illallah, who called for other than the rule of Allah. And those who said, let's vote on it, or agreed to it, or were silent about it. We say, come on guys, the rule of Allah, the rule of La ilaha illallah, this is a principle of Islam, the Sharia of Allah. They say, no, step by step, and we don't want to upset the West or other non-Islamic fractions. We don't want to upset them. On the account of Allah. They want to please others on the account of Allah. What's the result? The result is humiliation and defeat. The same people you don't want to please when you were in power, because you don't want to implement the rule of Allah, are now 30 million against you. This is what Islam told us. They did not please Allah when they were in power, so neither Allah was pleased with them, nor were the people. The ummah's got to understand the ABCs of Tawheed. What we teach our kids in text, we must let it register in our faith. من التمس رضا الناس من التمس رضا الله بسخط الناس رضي الله عنه وأرضى عنه الناس ومن التمس رضا الناس بسخط الله سخط الله عليه وأسخط عليه الناس. Whoever seeks the pleasure of Allah at the risk of displeasing people, Allah will take care of him and protect him and honor him. But whoever seeks, this is a hadith, whoever seeks the pleasure of people at the risk of displeasing Allah, Allah will abandon him to the care of the people. You wanted to please the people, the step-by-step stuff and vote and stuff. Okay, let them protect you. 30 million of them went against you. You need to understand that with La ilaha illallah on our side, there's nothing can defeat this ummah. That's what he told Ibn Abbas, a 10-year-old Ibn Abbas. If the whole universe gathered against you, they couldn't defeat you. After Ayn Jalut, people lived in peace and honor for decades to come. Actually, it lasted for over 146 years. No more oppression, no more violence, no more massacre, no more displacing, no more raping. The Tatar were so stunned from this for 146 years until a leader of Tatar came. His name is Taimur Link. He entered Halab in Damascus. When people turned away from Allah, Allah granted him power over the believers. After Ayn Jalut, but that was only 146 after the Battle of Ayn Jalut. And after that, Ayn Jalut, Syria and Egypt formed a strong bond. And it was considered like an armor and heart to the Muslim world. It was a strategic bond, a political bond, geographic, educational, historic bond. It showed that unity of the ummah was essential because Allah said, وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا. You become failures if you dispute. After Ayn Jalut, the low-life leaders, especially the grandkids of the great leader Salah ad-Dīn, the ones who were only worried about their thrones and to remain in power, they become exposed. The ones who used the enemies of Allah against their brothers just to remain in power. After this battle, I'm telling you the benefits of this victory. After this victory, it exposed them. It exposed those fake leaders. And they too vanished. Most of them either accepted the leadership of Quṭuz and joined under him, or most of them vanished away into the wastebasket of history. Even a more benefit, after this victory, when the bond between Damascus and Egypt strengthened, the Muslims went out to small municipalities or imarat. They were called small imarat in Syria and Palestine that were for the Crusaders. And the Crusaders were there for 166 years. They were causing Muslims the harm. And they were imarat not even Nur ad-Dīn and Imad ad-Dīn and Salah ad-Dīn reached. Now the blood descendants of Al-Ayyubi reclined to this world. But the descendants of Al-Ayyubi, by faith in Iman, took over from where they left off and stopped these people from harming, these Crusader municipalities, from harming the Muslims. And another effect of this battle, and to me, this victory, to me it's among the most amazing effects of this victory. The Tatar began to see Islam and read it, study it, and amazingly, they began to embrace Islam in large groups. They seen how Muslims were in power. Now the Muslims have the upper hand. They could do a genocide easily. They can rape them. There was no rape, no massacre, no imprisoning. They didn't even put them under scrutiny like our enemies do when they're in power, when they have the upper hand. They were astonished to see how the Muslims treated them and forgave them. They expected rape and genocide, but that wasn't Islam. They seen the justice and safety and manners of Islam when the Muslims had the upper hand. That being the main reason, along with the fact that the religion of the Tatar is a religion, it's a man-made religion, literally a man-made religion. Genghis Khan made that religion up. So they had a spiritual void that they filled with Islam. In fact, right before this big victory, 6 years before this victory, one of Hulagu's cousins learned about Islam and embraced it. And he was a big, prestigious man. So Hulagu was shocked by that and fought him. Finally, I guess the time is up, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease the suffering in this ummah, and may He replace the traitors of today with the likes of our beloved leader, Sayf ad-Dīn Quṭuz, rahimahullah ta'ala, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, wa jazakum